The silver coins clinked against the wooden table as Cordell Maverick counted them twice, his weathered hands trembling not from age but from something deeper, a wound in his soul that had festered for 3 years since the Apache raid took. Everything from him, $5. That's all the slave trader wanted for the blind Apache woman who sat motionless in the corner of the saloon, her face a mask of resigned dignity despite the rope burns around her wrists. She can't see nothing. Cowboy. The trader spat tobacco juice into a brass spittoon. But she's young enough, and them Apache women know how to work. Course, she might try to slit your throat first chance she gets. He laughed, revealing rotted teeth. Cordell's jaw tightened. He hadn't spoken a word in 3 years, not since. He'd found his wife and daughter's scalped bodies in their burned cabin, but his silence carried more weight than most men's words. The other patrons of Murphy's saloon watched with morbid curiosity as the notorious silent cowboy, who'd turned bounty hunter, made his decision. The woman, no more than 20 by his guess, lifted her head slightly when she heard the coins hit the table. Her sightless eyes were the color of storm clouds, and despite her blindness, they seemed to look straight through him. There was no fear in her expression, only a quiet strength that reminded him painfully of his dead wife. "Ayanna," she said suddenly, her voice like wind through canyon walls. "My name is Ayanna." The trader backhanded her casually. "Nobody asked you to speak, squaw." Before the man's hand could return to his side, Cordell's Colt was pressed against his temple. The saloon fell silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock and the trader's labored breathing. Cordell's eyes, pale blue like winter sky, held a coldness that had earned him his reputation from Texas to Montana. "The deal's done." Cordell's voice was a rusty whisper, the first words he'd spoken since swearing vengeance over 2 small graves. "But if you touch her again, I'll paint these walls with your brains." He holstered his weapon and gently took Ayanna's elbow, helping her to her feet. She moved with surprising grace, her bare feet making no sound on the saloon's grimy floorboards. As they walked toward the door, she turned her head toward him. "You bought me to kill me," she stated matter-of-factly, "because your family died by Apache hands." Cordell stopped walking. Around them, the saloon's patrons held their breath, waiting to see if the silent cowboy would put a bullet in her right there. Instead, he studied her face, the high cheekbones, the proud set of her shoulders, the way she held her chin up despite her circumstances. "Maybe," he finally answered. "Then you are a fool," Ayanna said quietly, "for you cannot kill what is already dead inside." Something in her words hit him like a physical blow. As they stepped out into the harsh Nevada sun, Cordell realized that, for the first time in 3 years, someone had seen past his reputation to the hollow man beneath. And she was blind. The wagon wheels carved deep ruts in the dusty trail as Cordell's horses struggled against the desert wind. Ayanna sat beside him on the wooden bench, her hands folded in her lap, saying nothing for the first 10 miles. But Cordell noticed things, how she tilted her head to catch the sound of a hawk's cry overhead, how her nostrils flared slightly when they passed a patch of wild sage, how she seemed to know when they were approaching water before even he could. "Smell it. Your ranch," she said suddenly, breaking the silence. "It sits in a valley where the wind changes direction 3 times each day." Cordell's hands tightened on the reins. She was right, though he couldn't fathom how she knew. "How do you—" "The air carries stories," Ayanna interrupted. "Your horses know this place. Their breathing changes. They walk faster." She paused, turning her face toward him. "And you? Your heartbeat quickens, not from joy, from pain." He wanted to deny it, but something about her quiet certainty made lies feel impossible. The Broken Arrow Ranch had been his dream, once a place where he and his wife, Melody, could raise their daughter far from the violence that seemed to follow him. Now it was a monument to his failures. "Tell me about them," Ayana said softly. No. The woman had yellow hair that caught sunlight like wheat, she continued as if he hadn't spoken. The child laughed like water over stones. They planted flowers by the front porch, purple ones that bloomed in spring. Cordell yanked the horses to a halt so hard they reared and snorted. His hand was on his gun before he realized it, but Ayana didn't flinch. She simply waited, her storm-gray eyes fixed somewhere beyond the horizon. How? The word came out strangled. You smell like grief, she said simply. It clings to you like smoke. And when the wind shifts from the southeast from where we're going, you stop breathing for 3 heartbeats. Every time. She reached out slowly, her fingertips barely grazing his knuckles where they gripped the leather reins. The pain is eating you alive, isn't it? Cordell jerked his hand away as if her touch burned him. No one had shown him gentleness since. He forced the memory down, started the horses moving again. They died because of me, he said finally. Because of what I was. What I did. What you were, Ayana repeated thoughtfully. But what are you now? The question hung between them like dust in the air. What was he now? A shell of a man who traded his humanity for revenge? A ghost haunting his own life? As they crested the hill that overlooked his valley, Cordell saw his ranch through Ayana's blindness felt rather than saw the emptiness of the place. The way even the wind seemed to avoid the burned-out cabin where his family had died. The new house he'd built stood like a fortress, all sharp angles and defensive positions, with no flowers, no laughter, no life. It's a beautiful valley, Ayana said quietly. But you've turned it into a tomb. The truth of her words hit him, harder than any bullet ever had. As they descended toward the ranch, Cordell found himself wondering if maybe, just maybe, Apache woman he'd bought for $5 might be worth more than all the gold in California. And for the first time in 3 years, he wasn't entirely sure he wanted to kill her. The first night, Cordell chained Ayana in the barn, not because he feared she would run. Where could a blind Apache woman go in the Nevada wilderness? But because he feared what he might do if he had to look at her too long. She reminded him too much of everything he'd lost, every reason he had to hate her people. He left her a blanket, water, and some hardtack bread, then retreated to his fortress house to drink himself into oblivion. But sleep wouldn't come. Instead, he lay on his narrow cot listening to something he hadn't heard in 3 years. Singing. Ayana's voice drifted through the night air like a prayer, rising and falling in what he recognized as an Apache lullaby. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, full of longing and loss, and it seemed to wrap around his heart like fingers around a throat. He pressed his pillow over his ears, but the sound found him anyway. When dawn broke gray and cold, Cordell stumbled to the barn expecting to find her broken, defeated. Instead, he found Ayana sitting cross-legged in a patch of sunlight streaming through the open door, her chains coiled neatly beside her like a sleeping snake. "You're good with locks," he said, hand moving instinctively to his Colt. "I'm good with listening," she corrected. "You use the same key for everything. Barn, house, that little strong box under your bed where you keep their photographs." She tilted her head toward him. "Would you like me to describe them to you? I can feel the love worn into the paper." Cordell's gun was halfway out of its holster before he realized she hadn't moved. She sat perfectly still, patient as stone, as if waiting for him to decide whether to shoot her or feed her. "How did you? You walk like a man carrying chains," Ayana said quietly. "Every step costs you. Every breath is borrowed time. You've been dying so long, you've forgotten how to live." She stood gracefully, her bare feet making no sound on the barn floor. "I know because I was dying too, until yesterday." "Yesterday?" "Yesterday, someone bought me. Not for revenge, not for labor, not for..." She gestured vaguely at her body. "You bought me because something in you recognized something in me, The Walking Dead know each other, don't they? Cordell holstered his weapon, but his hand stayed near the grip. You're Apache. Your people killed my family. My people? Ayanna laughed, but there was no humor in it. My people sold me to white slavers when I was 15 because a blind woman brings bad luck to the tribe. My husband, a white man, beat me because I couldn't see his moods coming. His friends took turns with me after he died, then sold me like cattle. She took a step toward him, and he noticed the faint scars on her wrists weren't just from recent ropes. I have no people, Cordell Maverick, just like you. She knew his name. Somehow, in the space of one night, this blind woman had learned more about him than most people discovered in years. How do you do it? He asked quietly. Do what? See so much when you can't see anything. Ayanna smiled then, the first real smile he'd seen from her. It transformed her face completely, erasing years of pain and revealing the girl she might have been in a different world. Close your eyes, she said. No. Close them. Against his better judgment, Cordell let his eyelids fall shut. Immediately the world exploded into sensation, the smell of hay and leather, the sound of wind through the barn rafters, the warmth of sunlight on his face, the taste of dust and something else, ... something sweet and wild. Now, Ayanna's voice was closer, though he hadn't heard her move. Tell me what you see. I see darkness, Cordell said, his eyes still closed. No. Ayanna's voice was patient, gentle. Darkness is the absence of light. What you see is the beginning of sight. Listen again. With his eyes shut, Cordell became aware of sounds he'd never noticed, the barn cat's purr from the loft above, the subtle difference in his horse's breathing, the way the wind sang different notes as it passed through gaps in the wood. But, more than that, he could feel Ayanna's presence like warmth from a fire, could sense her moving around him in a slow circle. Your heartbeat, she said softly. It's slowing down. For the first time since I've known you, you're not ready to kill. Something. Cordell's eyes snapped open. She was standing directly in front of him, close enough that he could see flecks of gold in her storm-gray eyes, close enough to smell the sage and rain scent of her hair. This is foolish, he growled, backing away. Is it? Ayanna followed him. Step for step. When was the last time you felt anything besides anger? When did you last notice that your mare favors her left front hoof, or that the barn owl has been nesting in your loft for 3 months, or that wild roses are blooming by the creek? How do you know about the roses? Because I can smell them. On your boots. You walked through them this morning, probably without even seeing them. She reached out slowly, giving him time to pull away, and touched his cheek. Her fingers were calloused from hard work, but surprisingly gentle. You're so busy being dead, you're missing being alive. Cordell caught her wrist, intending to push her away, but found himself studying her hand instead. The palm was crossed, with lines that spoke of labor and hardship, but her touch was steady, unafraid. Melody had soft hands, he said without meaning to. Tell me about Melody, she ... He stopped, realizing he hadn't spoken his wife's name aloud in 3 years. She made everything seem possible. Even when I was sure I was damned, she saw something worth saving. And your daughter? Rosie. The name came out like a prayer. She was 5. Had her mother's laugh and my stubborn streak. Used to follow me everywhere, asking questions about every damn thing she saw. His voice broke slightly. She wanted to be a cowboy like her papa. Ayanna's thumb traced across his knuckles. They're still with you. They're dead. Death doesn't end love, she said simply. It changes it. Makes it deeper, more precious. You think carrying your grief like a weapon honors them? They wouldn't want you to stop living. Cordell pulled away from her touch, but not roughly. You don't know what they would want. I know what every mother wants for her children, for them to find joy, to love again, to build something beautiful in the world. Ayana turned toward the barn door, where morning light painted golden rectangles on the floor. I know because I had a child once. The words hit Cordell like a physical blow. Had? A son? Born blind like his mother. Her voice remained steady, but he could see the subtle tension in her shoulders. When the tribe cast us out, he was 3 years old. Too young to understand why his people rejected him. Too innocent to survive what came after. What happened to him? The same thing that happens to Apache children when white soldiers find them. She didn't elaborate, didn't need to. He would be 7 now. Would have had his father's green eyes and my gift for listening to the world. Cordell felt something crack open in his chest, not breaking, but shifting, like ice beginning to thaw. For 3 years, he'd wrapped his pain around himself like armor, believing he was the only one who'd lost everything. But here was this woman who'd suffered losses that matched his own, and somehow she still moved through the world with grace instead of rage. How? He asked quietly. How do you bear it? The same way you'll learn to, Ayana said, turning back. To face him, one breath at a time, one day at a time, one small act of living at a time. She moved toward the barn door, then paused. Your roses need water, Cordell. They're dying of thirst. As she walked out into the morning sunlight, Cordell realized she was right. About the roses, about his Mari's limp, about the owl in the loft. About all of it. For the first time in 3 years, he followed someone instead of hunting them. Cordell found Ayana sitting by the creek, her bare feet dangling in the water. She'd somehow found the wild rose bush he'd forgotten existed, tangle of pink and white blooms that Melody had planted during their first spring together. He'd avoided this spot for 3 years, but seeing Ayana there, her face tilted toward the sun like a flower seeking light, made the memory feel less like a wound and more like a gift. The water tastes different here, she said without turning around. Sweeter, like it's been blessed. Cordell settled on the creek bank beside her, careful to leave space between them. Melody always said this spot was sacred. Said she could feel the prayers of everyone who'd ever stopped here to drink. She was Apache. She was white, from back east. He paused, surprised by how easily the words came, but she had intuition about things. Could read people, read the land. Said it came from paying attention instead of just looking. Ayana smiled. Sounds like someone I would have liked. For some reason, the idea of his wife and this Apache woman being friends didn't anger him the way it should have. Maybe because they were both healers in their way, Melody with her gentle words and endless patience, Ayana with her ability to see straight to the heart of things. She would have helped you, Cordell admitted. Soon as she saw you in that saloon, she'd have been planning ways to set you free, give you a place to start over. Is that what you're doing? Helping me? Cordell considered the question. Yesterday he'd bought her intending to kill her. Today he was sitting by a creek talking about his dead wife like she was an old friend. I don't know what I'm doing. Good. Ayana said unexpectedly. Not knowing is the first step toward learning. A hawk circled overhead, its cry echoing off the canyon walls. Ayana tilted her head to follow its flight pattern, and Cordell found himself watching her instead of the bird. There was something graceful about the way she moved, even sitting still like she was dancing to music only she could hear. Tell me about your world, he said suddenly. My world? The one you see, with your other senses. Ayana was quiet. For so long he thought she wouldn't answer. When she spoke, her voice was soft, wondering. It's full of colors you don't have names for. The sound purple makes when wind passes through pine needles. The way anger tastes bitter and sharp, like copper pennies. The texture of laughter, rough like bark but warm. She trailed her fingers in the creek water. Right now this moment tastes like possibility. silver and gold mixed together. And me? Cordell asked before he could stop himself. What do I taste like? She turned toward him, her sightless eyes seeming to look right through him to something deeper. Like winter, she said quietly, but not the killing kind. The quiet kind, when everything sleeps under snow, waiting for spring. Her voice dropped to a whisper. You taste like someone who's forgotten how to hope but hasn't quite given up. Something shifted in Cordell's chest, a loosening he hadn't felt in 3 years. Without thinking, he reached out and touched her hand where it rested on the grass. Between them, she didn't pull away. I killed 17 Apache warriors, he said suddenly, needing her to know the worst of him. After I found them. Tracked them for 2 months and put bullets in everyone. Some begged. Some fought. I killed them all the same. Ayana's fingers tightened slightly around his. And how did that taste? Like poison. Good, she lifted. Their joined hands, studding his scarred knuckles with her fingertips. Killing should never taste good to a man like you. That's how I know you're not lost. How can you be sure? Because, she said, smiling that transformative smile again, a lost man wouldn't ask. As the sun climbed higher, warming their faces, and turning the creek into a ribbon of light, Cordell realized something had changed. The rage he'd carried for 3 years was still there, but it no longer filled every corner of his being. There was room now for other things, curiosity, companionship, something that might someday become peace. Ayana, he said carefully. Yes? Would? You like to see the house? The real one, not the fortress I built. It's where they lived. She squeezed his hand gently. I'd be honored. The original cabin sat 50 yards from Cordell's fortress house, its charred timbers weathered gray by 3 harsh winters. He'd left it exactly as he'd found it that terrible day walls collapsed, roof gone, everything inside burned to ash and bone, a monument to his failure. But as he walked toward it with Ayana, he saw it through her senses, not a tomb, but a place where love had lived, where laughter had echoed off the walls and hope had been planted in careful rows. She grew vegetables here, Ayana said, stopping beside what had once been Melody's garden. Now it was an overgrown tangle of weeds and volunteer plants. Carrots, potatoes, something that smelled like onions? Cordell nodded, though she couldn't see it. Melody said we needed to be self-sufficient. Grew enough to feed half the territory. He knelt and pulled a weed, revealing the stubborn green shoots of something that had survived 3 seasons without care. She had a gift with growing things. Still does, Ayana said softly. She moved carefully through the ruined garden, her fingers trailing over leaves and stems. Feel this. She guided his hand to a climbing vine that had wrapped itself around the cabin's remaining corner post. Hidden among the leaves were tiny white flowers, sweet-smelling and delicate. Morning glories, Cordell breathed, Melody's favorites. They've been waiting for you, Ayana said. Growing wild, but still here, still beautiful. They spent the afternoon in the ruins, and with every story Cordell shared, the place felt less like a graveyard and more like a garden. Ayana listened with her whole being as he described Melody's laugh, Rosie's endless questions, the way his daughter would sit on his lap while he read to her from the only book they owned. A collection of fairy tales where everyone lived happily ever after. What was your favorite story? Ayana asked as they sat in what had been the kitchen, afternoon light slanting through the missing roof. The one about the princess who could hear colors, Cordell said without thinking, then stopped. Christ. I'd forgotten ... Tell me. It was about a blind princess who could hear colors singing and taste the sound of starlight. Everyone thought she was cursed, but she could see things no one else could. Lies. Hidden truths, the future written in wind patterns. He looked at Ayana with sudden understanding. Rosie always said that Princess was the luckiest one in the whole book. Your daughter was wise. She was 5 years old. Age has nothing to do with wisdom, Ihana said gently. Children see clearly because they haven't learned to lie to themselves yet. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Cordell made a decision that surprised him. Stay, he said suddenly. Ayana went very still. What? Stay. Not as a slave, not as anything you don't want to be. Just stay. He gestured toward the ruins around them. Help me rebuild this. Make it something new. Why? Cordell was quiet for a long time, listening to the evening wind and the morning glory vines, feeling the weight of 3 years' solitude lifting from his shoulders. Because I'm tired of being dead, he said finally. And you? You make me remember what it felt like to be alive. Ayana reached out slowly, her fingers finding his face in the gathering dusk. She traced the lines around his eyes, the furrow between his brows, the scar on his jaw from a long-ago fight. I'll stay, she whispered, but not to rebuild the past. Cordell, to build something entirely new. As night fell over the valley, Cordell felt something he hadn't experienced in 3 years. Hope. It was fragile as a newborn foal, uncertain as morning mist, but it was real. And for the first time since he'd lost everything, that felt like enough. 2 weeks later, Cordell found himself doing something he'd sworn he'd never do again. Planning. For the future. They'd started small, clearing the old garden, salvaging what wood they could from the burned cabin, laying foundation stones for something that would be neither the home he'd lost nor the fortress he'd built, but something entirely new. Ayana worked beside him from dawn to dusk, her hands sure and capable despite her blindness. She seemed to know instinctively where each board belonged, which stones would bear weight, how to shape space so it felt welcoming rather than defensive. You're building this too big, she said on the third day, running her hands along the foundation they'd laid. It's a house for 2 people. Is it? She tilted her head toward him, and he felt that familiar sensation of being seen completely. Or are you building it for the family you hope might someday fill it? Cordell's hands stilled on the timber he'd been measuring. The idea of future children, of laughter filling these rooms again, should have felt like betrayal. But it didn't. It felt like possibility. Maybe, he admitted quietly. Good, Ayana said, and went back to work. The house took shape slowly, carefully. Unlike his fortress with its gun ports and defensive angles, this building curved with the natural flow of the land. Wide windows faced east to catch the morning light, and a deep porch wrapped around 2 sides to take advantage of the evening breeze. Ayana insisted on a garden plot close to the kitchen and room for morning glories to climb the corner posts. As they worked, Cordell found himself talking more than he had in years. He told her about his childhood in Missouri, about learning to handle horses from his grandfather, about the war that had changed him in ways he was still discovering. In return, she shared fragments of her own story, a childhood torn between 2 worlds, neither of which fully accepted her, the brief happiness of her marriage before it turned dark, the way music had kept her sane through the worst times. What will you do? She asked one evening as they sat on the new porch watching sunset paint the valley in shades of gold and crimson. When this is finished, I mean, will you go back to bounty hunting? Cordell considered the question. A month ago, the answer would have been automatic hunting was all he knew, all he was good for. But something had changed in him during these weeks of building instead of destroying. Maybe not, he said slowly. Been thinking about horses. Always had a gift with them, even as a boy. Could break the wildest Mustang without breaking its spirit. Like someone broke yours? He looked at her sharply, but there was no judgment in her expression, only understanding. Yeah, he said quietly. Maybe like that. That night, for the first time since he'd bought her, Cordell offered Ayana his bed while he took the floor. She refused, but not with fear or anger, with something that looked almost like affection. "We're not there yet," she said gently, "but thank you for asking instead of taking." The next morning brought visitors, a family of settlers whose wagon had broken down on the main trail. The man was injured, his wife exhausted, their 2 young children hungry and frightened. The old Cordell would have turned them away or charged them for help. Instead, he found himself inviting them to stay until their wagon was repaired. Ayana transformed around the children, her face lighting up as she listened to their chatter and answered their endless questions. She taught them to identify birds by their songs, to feel the difference between good soil and bad, to understand that being different didn't mean being broken. "She's like the fairy tale princess," the youngest girl whispered to her mother, not realizing Ayana could hear. "The one who sees with magic." "What fairy tale princess?" her mother asked. "The one who could hear colors singing and taste starlight." "Mama, do you think she's magic?" Cordell and Ayana exchanged a look across the dinner table, and for the first time in months, he smiled, really smiled, the kind that reached his eyes and changed his whole face. "Maybe she is," he said quietly, after the family left, blessing them both and promising to spread word about the excellent hospitality at the Maverick Ranch. Ayana found Cordell standing in their half-finished house, staring out the window toward the mountains. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "That maybe Rosie was right," he said without turning around. "Maybe being different isn't a curse. Maybe it's a gift." Ayana moved to stand beside him, close enough that he could feel her warmth, smell the sage and rain scent of her hair. "Cordell," she said softly, "yeah, I think I'm ready." He turned to look at her then, seeing the soft flush in her cheeks, the way her hands trembled slightly as she reached for him. "Ready for what?" Instead of answering with words, she stood on her tiptoes and kissed him. The kiss was gentle, hesitant, like the first drops of rain after a long drought. Cordell stood frozen for a heartbeat, overwhelmed by sensations he'd forgotten existed, the softness of a woman's lips, the flutter of her breath against his cheek, the way her fingers curved against his jaw as if she were reading his face like one of her mysterious maps. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers, breathing hard. "Ayana," he whispered. "I know," she said quietly. "It feels like betraying them, like forgetting. Does it?" He searched her storm-gray eyes, seeing his own confusion reflected there. "Because it doesn't feel that way to me. It feels like remembering what it means to be human." She smiled then, soft and wondering. "What does this taste like to you?" Cordell considered the question seriously, the way he'd learned to consider all her questions. "Like sunrise," he said finally. "Like hope tastes when you'd given up on ever feeling it again." "For me," she whispered, "it tastes like coming home. They didn't rush into anything." Cordell had learned patience in the hardest possible way, and Ayana had been hurt too many times to trust easily. Instead, they courted each other with the slow deliberation of people who understood that the best things were worth waiting for. He brought her wildflowers, not because she could see them, but because she could smell their stories in the morning air. She cooked for him, her hands sure and graceful as she moved around their kitchen, creating meals that tasted like comfort and care. They talked long into the evenings, sharing memories and dreams, learning the shape of each other's souls. "Tell me what you see when you look at me," Ayana said one night as they sat by the creek, her head resting on his shoulder. "Beauty," Cordell said without hesitation. "Strength." "Grace under fire," he paused, struggling for words. "You look like someone who's been through hell and came out the other side with her soul intact." "And what do I feel like?" He turned slightly so he could trace the line of her cheek with one finger. "Like home." The word hung between them, heavy with possibility. Home had been something Cordell thought he'd lost forever, something that existed only in memory and regret. But here, with this woman who saw the world through her heart instead of her eyes, home felt possible again. A month passed. Then, too, the house was nearly finished now, and with each day that passed, it felt more like a place where happiness could grow. Neighbors began stopping by, settlers heading west, cowboys moving cattle, even a few Apache traders who recognized something in Ayanna and treated her with the respect she'd been denied by her own people. "You're building something here," old Charlie Wainwright observed during one of his weekly visits. Charlie was the closest thing to a neighbor they had, his own spread 20 miles south through the canyon. Not just a house. A place where folks feel welcome. "Ayanna's doing," Cordell said, watching his woman, and yes, she was his now. In every way that mattered, serve coffee to Charlie and his youngest grandson. "She has a gift for making people feel seen. Both of you got that gift, son. Just took you a while to remember it." That evening, as they sat on their completed porch watching stars emerge in the darkening sky, Ayanna asked the question that had been building between them for weeks. "Cordell, will you marry me?" He went very still. In all their careful courtship, all their gentle exploration of what they might build together, neither had spoken of marriage. It was too weighty, too permanent, too much like making promises to the future when the past still held so much pain. "I thought," he said carefully, "that you might want to wait. Until you're sure." "I am sure." She turned in his arms so she could face him fully. "I've been sure since the day you asked me to stay. Not as a slave or a convenience, but as a partner. As an equal." Her fingers found his face in the darkness. "I want to marry you, Cordell Maverick. I want to take your name and give you mine. I want to build something lasting with you. Even though people will talk, even though some won't accept us." "Especially because of that," she said fiercely. "Let them talk. Let them stare and whisper and judge. We know what we are to each other." Cordell captured her hands in both of his, bringing them to his lips. "Yes," he said against her palms. "Yes, I'll marry you. Yes, I want to build something lasting. Yes to all of it." When they kissed this time, it tasted like promises and forever. The wedding took place on a crisp October morning, with golden aspen leaves falling like confetti around the little church in Silver Creek. It wasn't the grand affair either of them might have imagined in different lives, just a simple ceremony with a handful of friends and neighbors who'd come to love the quiet cowboy and his remarkable bride. Charlie Wainwright stood up as Cordell's best man, his weathered face beaming with pride. The settler family they'd helped months earlier had traveled 3 days to attend, their children scattering flower petals along the aisle while whispering excitedly about the magic princess getting married. Ayanna wore a simple white dress that one of the neighbor women had sewn, her dark hair crowned with a circlet of morning glories, the same flowers that had survived in Melody's garden, now transplanted to bloom around their new home. She carried no bouquet, needing her hands free to navigate the unfamiliar church, but her face glowed with a joy so radiant that several guests wiped tears from their eyes. When Cordell first saw her walking down the aisle, guided by young Billy Wainwright, he felt his breath catch in his throat. She moved with that same graceful certainty she brought to everything, her chin lifted proudly, her storm-gray eyes fixed on something beyond sight, perhaps the sound of his heartbeat, perhaps the taste of his happiness on the morning air. "Dearly beloved," Pastor Morrison began, his voice carrying easily through the small wooden church, "we are gathered here today to witness something remarkable, not just the union of two hearts, but the triumph of love over loss, hope over despair, light over darkness." The ceremony was brief but meaningful. When the time came for vows, Cordell spoke in his quiet, measured way about finding life again in the most unexpected place. About learning that love wasn't something you lost, but something you chose, again and again, every day. Ayana's vows were poetry set to music, speaking of two wounded souls who had found healing in each other, of the way darkness could give birth to the most brilliant light, of building something beautiful from the ashes of what came before. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Pastor Morrison said, his own voice thick with emotion. "Cordell, you may kiss your bride." The kiss was gentle, reverent, full of promises for all the tomorrows stretching ahead of them. When they parted, Ayana whispered something only Cordell could hear. "This tastes like forever." The celebration afterward was simple but joyous music and dancing in the church hall, food prepared by loving hands, children racing between the tables while their parents shared stories and laughter. Cordell found himself amazed at how many lives they'd touched in just a few short months. How many people had come to think of them as family. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, the newlyweds prepared to head home to their valley. Their wagon was loaded with wedding gifts, quilts and preserves, tools and books, a rocking chair that Charlie had carved himself for the babies that are bound to come. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Maverick?" Cordell asked, helping Ayana up onto the wagon seat. "I've been ready my whole life," she replied, settling beside him with a contented sigh. The ride home was peaceful, filled with comfortable silence and occasional shared observation about the changing season, the sound of geese flying south, the way the air tasted of coming winter. Their valley welcomed them back with familiar scents and sounds, the horses nickering from the pasture, the creek murmuring its eternal song, the wind sighing through the pine trees on the mountainside. Their house stood waiting for them, windows glowing golden in the lamplight they left burning. It looked like what it was, a home built by love, designed for happiness, ready to shelter whatever dreams they chose to plant there. That night, as they lay in their marriage bed with moonlight streaming through the windows, Ayana traced lazy patterns on Cordell's chest with her fingertips. "Do you ever wonder," she murmured, "what would have happened if you'd walked past that saloon that day? If you'd kept riding?" Cordell considered the question, his hand stroking through her long, dark hair. "I think," he said slowly, "that we would have found each other anyway. Maybe not that day, maybe not that year, but eventually. Some things are just meant to be. You believe in fate now?" "I believe in second chances," he corrected. "I believe that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you leads you to the best thing. I believe that love doesn't end with death. It just makes room for new love to grow." Ayana lifted her head to look at him, her sightless eyes somehow seeing straight to his soul. "And what do you believe about us?" "I believe," Cordell said, pulling her closer, "that we're going to fill this house with laughter and babies and hope. I believe we're going to grow old together, watching our children and grandchildren play in Melody's garden. I believe that what we've built here is going to last." "And how does that taste to you?" Cordell smiled in the darkness, remembering the broken man who'd counted out $5 silver in a dusty saloon, thinking he was buying revenge. Instead, he'd bought redemption, healing, a future he'd never dared imagine. "Like light," he whispered against her hair. "It tastes like pure, beautiful light." Outside their window, the morning glory slept in the moonlight, their white faces turned toward the stars. In the distance, a night bird called to its mate, and somewhere in the darkness, new life stirred seeds waiting for spring, dreams taking root, love preparing to bloom again in all its wild, wonderful, impossible glory. Silent Cowboy had found his voice at last, and it was singing.